Okay, so today we're diving into something, something we all do constantly, describing people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about, how you talk about colleagues, friends, even people you've just met.
Exactly. It's like fundamental to how we communicate, how we navigate our social world.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the better we are at it, the better we can, understand others and make ourselves understood.
And for this deep dive, we're looking at a really interesting source. It's actually an episode from an intermediate English podcast.
Mm-hmm. Which might sound a bit basic, maybe?
Maybe, but the way they break down the language of describing people, it offers some surprisingly practical tools for anyone, really.
Right. Not just language learners.
Our mission here is basically to pull out those useful methods. We want to go beyond just, vocabulary lists and really get into the nuances of describing someone effectively.
And looking at it from that language learning angle often brings a kind of clarity, doesn't it? It forces you to think about the building blocks.
It does. It makes it conscious. Okay, so let's start unpacking this. First up, physical appearance. Seems obvious, right?
The foundation. The source gives us those basic words: tall, short, slim, overweight.
Curly hair, straight hair, bald, skin tone, eye color. The usual suspects.
Yeah, the standards. And they show how to combine them.
Mm-hmm.
Simple phrases like, he's medium height with short black hair.
Or she has long blonde hair and green eyes, that kind of thing.
Even adding details like, he wears glasses and usually dresses casually. Just simple combinations.
And they seem basic, but let's think about why these matter. It's that first visual tag, isn't it?
Definitely. It's how you'd point someone out in a crowd or, give someone a first mental image.
The absolute starting point.
Exactly. It's functional for identification, yeah, but it's also the first piece of the puzzle. The source even suggests a little exercise.
Oh, yeah.
Just try to describe someone you see often using 3 features. A good way to just kind of lock it in mentally.
Makes sense. Okay, so from the visual, let's move deeper. Personality traits.
Right. The source lists common adjectives. Things like friendly, funny, generous, hardworking.
Shy, talkative, honest, even rude is in there. Words we use all the time to, sum people up.
And what's really useful, I think, is how they don't just list the words. They show them in action.
How do you mean?
Well, they give sentences linking the trait to, actual behavior. For example, he's really outgoing. Okay, but how? He talks to everyone.
Ah, I see. So it gives evidence.
Exactly. Or she's very kind and always helps others. The kindness is shown through the helping.
Or I think he's a bit shy. He doesn't speak much in meetings. So the shyness is linked to not speaking up.
Precisely. It's not just sticking a label on someone. It's illustrating why that label fits based on what they do.
And that feels much more solid, doesn't it? More insightful than just the word alone. Outgoing becomes clearer when you picture someone talking to everyone.
Yeah, you get a quicker, maybe deeper understanding because you see the behavior. It gives you a real sense of their tendencies.
The source even has a little dialogue snippet, right, about a coworker.
It does, yeah. Someone describes a new colleague as hardworking and easy to talk to. Just shows how we naturally use these in conversation.
Okay, so traits linked to behavior. That makes sense. Then the source goes even further, looking at habits and behaviors directly.
Yes, using these really handy phrases like, he's the kind of person who...
Or she tends to.
And the classic, he always or she never.
These feel quite powerful, actually. They seem to capture something more consistent.
They do, because they point to patterns, not just single instances. Think about the examples. He's the kind of person who never gives up. That says a lot.
Definitely. Or she tends to overthink things. That reveals a whole thought process.
He always arrives early to work. It paints a picture of reliability, maybe discipline. It's much richer than just an adjective sometimes.
It really is. Well, an adjective is like a snapshot. These habits, they feel more like the operating system, the consistent way someone functions.
That's a good way to put it. And understanding these patterns, that's where you get those aha moments. You start to see why people act the way they do.
It moves beyond just describing what they are to understanding how they typically operate.
And the source prompts reflection again. Think of someone you admire. Describe their personality and habits, pushing you to connect those dots.
Okay, so we've covered appearance, traits linked to behavior, and habits. Now, the source gets into slightly trickier territory. Positive versus negative traits.
Yeah, it lists some typically seen as positive, ambitious, honest, creative, dependable.
And some often seen as negative. Arrogant, lazy, impatient, selfish.
But the key thing here, and the source touches on this with its examples, is context.
Right. Like the example, I like working with her because she's so dependable. Dependability is valued at work.
Exactly. And the other one, he can be a bit impatient, especially when he's tired. It links the impatience to a specific situation being tired. It's not necessarily a constant state.
And that really highlights how subjective these labels can be, doesn't it? One person's ambitious could easily be another's pushy or ruthless.
Absolutely. It depends entirely on your perspective, the situation, your relationship with the person.
So while the source categorizes them, it's implicitly showing that describing personality often involves an element of, well, judgment or evaluation.
It does. And just to be clear, our focus here is on understanding the language being used for these descriptions, not necessarily agreeing with the labels themselves. We're just reporting what the source presents.
Good point. Okay, another tool the source brings up is making comparisons, adding another layer.
Yeah, using structures like, he's more outgoing than his brother.
Or maybe she's not as organized as her manager, comparing against someone else.
Or even, I'm quieter than most people in my class, comparing to a group.
This definitely adds nuance, right? It places the person relative to someone or something else, give you a reference point.
Exactly. Instead of just saying someone is organized, saying they're not as organized as their manager, gives you a much more specific idea. It adds context.
And then there are the superlatives, the extremes.
Right. He's the funniest person I know. Or she's the most generous friend I have.
These are strong statements. They really place someone at the top of a particular scale, at least in your experience.
They do. They express a high degree of a characteristic. It's a powerful way to emphasize a trait. And again, the source suggests practicing. Compare two people you know.
Using adjectives, right? Reinforcing that comparative idea. And just quickly, the source wraps up this section with a handy vocabulary table.
Yeah, just a quick summary of some key words like outgoing, generous, shy, dependable, arrogant, and their basic meanings. A little cheat sheet.
Useful reference. Okay, so let's just quickly recap the main takeaways from this material. We've seen how to describe physical appearance.
As that initial identifier.
Right. Then linking personality words to actual behaviors to make them clearer.
Understanding habits and patterns for deeper insight.
Navigating that language of positive and negative traits, always keeping context in mind.
And finally, using comparisons and superlatives to add depth and specificity.
The source itself sums it up nicely. The more specific your descriptions, the more interesting and clear your conversations will be.
And for you, listening, the real value here is realizing that being more precise and nuanced in how you talk about people, it just leads to better communication.
And maybe a richer understanding of the people around you, too, moving past those easy labels.
Definitely.
Yeah.
More insight, less generalization.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the language of describing people, drawing on those practical tips from the English Boost podcast source.
And maybe here's something to think about. Consider how the specific words you choose to describe someone don't just reflect how you see them, but might actually shape how you interact with them. Maybe even limit or expand how you perceive their potential. What if consciously trying to use more nuanced, specific language actually changed, your whole understanding of the people in your life?